Hello and welcome to Taiwan Today. I'm Natalie So. Today in the studio I have with me award-winning journalist Kathy Chen. Kathy was part of Pulitzer Prize-winning teams at the Wall Street Journal, and she recently moved to Taiwan with her husband Kin Moy, who is the director of the American Institute in Taiwan. And Kathy actually started her journalism career here in Taiwan in the 1980s. Tell us a little bit about that, why you decided to get into journalism at that time here in Taiwan. And by the way, welcome to Taiwan.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
Back.
It's like coming home, coming back to Taiwan. It's been about 20 years, a little more than 20 years. And so it's different coming back with 4 kids and a husband who's heading AIT, but
I'm sure
it's fun to see the difference.
Role for you. You were single and young at the time, right?
Single and young, and yes, and working in journalism. I started at the China Post, 中国邮报, as a journalist, and I learned how to be a journalist there, working as an editor and reporting stories at a really interesting time in Taiwan.
So it was the late 1980s, is that right?
It was, I came here in 1987 to study Chinese and got a part-time job working at the Post.
So that was right when Taiwan was lifting martial law,
right?
And democratic reforms were happening. What was it like being a reporter at that time?
It was an exciting time to be here. Taiwan was really a place in transition. There were fights in the legislative yuan.
There still are.
There still are. They're not as bad. I don't think people are throwing shoes at each other and pulling hair as much as in the 80s. There were protests in the streets. I used to be out there and get hit by water cannon along with the opposition protesters. But it was also just a fascinating time to be here because you watched this island, you know, kind of the economy was taking off. It was one of the 4 tigers, or you know, along with Hong Kong, Korea, and Singapore. And politically, things were opening up. So it was just a fascinating time to watch things change so rapidly. The society was changing, people's views were changing, the media was changing. So yeah, it was a great opportunity.
Was it easy to talk to people at the time as a journalist?
I think it's a lot easier now. Maybe partially because I'm not working as a full-time journalist anymore. But it wasn't as difficult as working in China, which I did later. But it was still, people were cautious, you know, especially working for foreign media. I worked for the China Post, but I also was working as a stringer for United Press International and Newsweek and a couple of other organizations. And I would have people kind of, you know, you call them on the phone and they be a little wary. But generally, yeah, I think people were willing to chat. You had to, you know, kind of make people feel comfortable. But
do you think Taiwan has changed a lot since then?
Taiwan has changed tremendously. I mean, when we first came back in July, it was, you know, I tried to find the old landmarks where I lived, you know, where I worked in this old CNA building, and I didn't recognize anything. I mean, there wasn't the Jieyuan, there wasn't the subway system, there weren't all these highways, there weren't all these tall buildings. But I think the bigger change has been with the way society, you know, you have a very vibrant democracy now. You know, as you said, there's still fights, and there's been a lot of fighting lately ahead of the elections, the presidential elections, which I think everyone's watching with interest. There's still protests, but you know, people are. It's a much more open society. You know, it really feels like a democracy. You know, you've got a very strong civil society. You've got a real strong sense of social responsibility. You've got a press that's amazing. You know, when I worked at the China Post, I mean, it was still, you know, there were a lot of, you know, reports, political reports that were pretty accurate, but at that time, a lot of the media was still owned by the Nationalist Party. And so occasionally, you know, people would call and they'd want things written a certain way, or, you know, they'd suggest you write things a certain way. And I don't think, from what I can tell now, I mean, it's pretty much the media goes after, yes, they go after every good story.
And there's so much media going on here.
There is a lot of media, yes. It's actually nice to see a place where media is really vibrant and growing, because it's you know, the media is facing difficulties around the world.
So what was it like? I know you were working for the Wall Street Journal
yes.
in China,
yes.
so very important media. And what was it like covering China?
Well, China was, you were asking if it was difficult reporting in Taiwan. It wasn't anything like the reporting in China in the 80s. It was right after, in the 90s, it was right after the Tiananmen massacre had happened. And so people were very, very cautious. And the government was very wary of reporters, of foreign reporters then. And in fact, they used to have all the foreign reporters and the diplomats living in specific compounds, and we had to work in those compounds. And there were cameras there.
Oh,
there
wow.
were our phones were tapped. We assumed our apartments were bugged. In fact, I met Kin during my stint working there. Yeah, he was. He lived next door to.
So he was a diplomat.
He was a diplomat,
journalist.
and I was a journalist, and we had mutual friends in common, and so we actually kind of were working side by side and next door to each other and got to know each other that way.
Oh.
But it was hard,
That's
because
nice.
you'd write, especially if you were reporting about a sensitive issue like politics, you'd have to be very careful about not burning your sources. So if you wanted to meet them, you'd have to go out of your apartment, find a public phone to make a phone call, arrange to meet with them, and you try to meet with them in a public place. But before you meet them, you have to make sure that no one's tailing you, because a lot of times if they saw you leaving the compound, the guy at the gate would pick up the phone. You'd see him pick up the phone.
Wow.
And then when you got out onto the street and turned the corner onto the main street, you'd see these guys run out and jump on their motorcycles, and then they'd be chasing you. They'd be following you. So you'd have to find a way to lose them. It was like being in a
So how do you
Jala
lose
novel.
them?
You
zigzag and
you could zigzag, but that would piss them off if you lost them. I actually pissed them off once, and they actually would do things like bash in your windows and stuff. But
Wow.
but generally, you try and you could kind of duck into a department store and go out another door, or kind of walk around. And but it was, I think they wanted to send a message that that they were watching you, that they didn't want you to do anything, kind of over a certain line. But I think overall, I had a great experience there. I met a lot of people, and I think the stories I wrote tended to be accurate and fair and balanced. And so I never really, even though I had a lot of police interest in me, they tended to, kind of the foreign ministry, kind of felt that the stories I covered were fair, and so they didn't give me a hard time. And sometimes the secret police could be pretty friendly. Like,
Really?
If you, if they were working late, if I was working late, and so they'd be working late, I'd send out a beer or a soft drink for them, and if I couldn't find
they
my
appreciate it, right?
they said they couldn't drink, but they would take an ice cream if it was hot, and and if I couldn't find my car, they would, in the parking lot, they would, I'd be going the wrong way, and they'd say, no, your car's over that way. So it was.
So you got a rapport going with them.
Yeah, I got to be friends with some of them. I got to know them
That's
pretty
nice.
well.
Well, Kathy, I know you're part of some Pulitzer Prize winning teams in Washington, D.C., and you also helped develop some things for the team that won the award for Chinese reporting. So, what an impressive record you have in journalism.
Well, thank you.
Do you have any insights for people, who aspire to be a world-class journalist like yourself?
Well, I think the important thing is to really be curious and interested, to have a good nose for news, to feel that when something is happening, and to be willing to be hungry to dig deep. In addition to that, though, it's important to, as I said earlier, to be accurate and fair in your reporting, to understand the whole story, to go in with an open mind, and to really hear what people are saying from both sides. Not only, you might go in with a kind of preconception of what the story is, but you want to have an open mind while you're doing that, and you want to also hear the other side. I think journalism has also changed a lot in the last decade or so because of the internet. And the other thing that becomes very important is to be fast, to have, not only to have a good nose for news, but to jump on it immediately and to cover it. An unfortunate part of the internet, though, is that the emphasis is on speed, on turning things around very quickly. So often you don't have the time to dig deep enough to
be accurate.
To be accurate, sometimes to be accurate. Accuracy is still important. Right. I think you can never sacrifice that. But sometimes you don't have the time and the luxury that we used to as a journalist. When I worked in China, you could go off for 3 weeks and report a story. And you could spend a week. I knew reporters who spent a week trying to craft the first paragraph of their feature story. So you get a beautifully written story that's very well written and well reported. I think the other thing that grabs people are telling a story through anecdotes, not just having a lot of experts who are explaining their viewpoints, but telling it through examples and finding
like
the
real
right
life
examples.
Stories.
The life story of somebody, if you're writing about cancer, for example, finding the person who embodies the fight against cancer, whether it's the doctor or the researcher or a patient, for example, So in China, you might be writing about, or in Taiwan, you might be writing about changes in the society, how social changes are affecting people's values, for example. You'd want to not just have experts talking about that. You want to find a family who is struggling with that issue, maybe kids who are becoming, who are trying to, get educated, but also might be interested in making lots of money. And how do you marry the traditional values of family with earning lots of money, for example. So you want to find those examples to tell the story, and I think those are the stories that people remember and that stand out.
Yeah, you did a lot of great work. I've read some of
your
articles.
It was a great time to be reporting in Asia because whether you're talking about Taiwan or Hong Kong or China, these were places that were in major transition, and there's always great stories when that happens.
I know both you and Kin have very high-powered careers. You can put it that way. He's a diplomat, and you're award-winning journalist. So, was there any was there a certain time when after you got married that you had to decide, okay, whose career takes priority? Like if somebody has an assignment or whatever.
Initially, I think we were both able to balance our careers pretty well. But as Kin's career became more important, where he had to go to White House meetings, it became hard for me to say, Kin, could you take time off to take the kid to the doctor? Because he'd say, I have to go to the White House for a meeting.
To meet with the president, right?
Well, I don't know. He didn't meet with the president that often, but so I'd end up doing that. So it's always a struggle and a balance, and I think a lot of women all over the world and men are dealing with that, the kind of life-work balance, and you kind of have to take it day by day. We happen to have 4 kids and a dog, so it's...
I don't know, how do you manage that?
Well, I can't work full-time as a journalist anymore here, but I also stopped working full-time as a journalist a few years ago to pursue one of my dreams, which is to write fiction. But that also allowed me to have a little more flexibility, to continue to do some reporting, but also to work from home a lot. But when I worked in Beijing, for example, as the assistant bureau chief for the Wall Street Journal, I was able to work from home. So there were pictures that the staff posted of me in a video when I left, of me editing and nursing a baby at the same time. So it was a balance all the time. So,
what about, I know that you've come here, you can't be a journalist. Is it because of your role as the wife of the director of AIT?
Yes, I could probably do a little bit of reporting, but I can't write about
can't work for the Wall Street
issues.
Journal,
I
right?
can't. Well, I could probably do some work writing for them as a freelance on cultural issues, but I can't really write about politics or foreign policy, things that would appear to be a conflict of interest, and that applies to both the State Department and the Wall Street Journal, because I might be meeting people that I would potentially be writing about, and you don't want people to get the wrong idea. I'm not representing the
Who am I representing now, right?
Right, exactly.
So is that difficult for you to have to put that part, down for now, the journalistic part of you? You probably can't say everything you want to say, right? Or everything that's on your mind.
Well, I have to be careful, right? It is a little frustrating, especially now because the biggest story has happened in Taiwan in decades with the Xi Ma visit, and it'd be great to be covering that. But I think as Kin's wife, I have an important role to play here, and I think it's, not just supporting him, but also, helping our kids adjust, and just also kind of being, part of this effort to help have strengthened cooperation between Taiwan and China. Taiwan and the United States, and also just to increase understanding on both sides. So I think that's an important role to play, and I'm hoping I can get some good stories out of that. If not for journalism, at least for fiction. So,
Well, tell us about the fiction. Your ambitions in that area.
Well, I've always wanted to write stories for kids because my children love to read. So I've written one young adult story, novel that's based in Beijing, but I'm working with an editor on getting that into shape. And I'm also working on some short stories now, and I'd like to write a story based in Taiwan with maybe a protagonist who's living here. So I'm thinking about that. If you have any good ideas, let me know.
We can discuss that.
Yeah.
Well, how is it different writing fiction? I'm sure it's a totally different genre, a totally different mindset, right?
It's very different. I think you have to really delve deep into your own emotions. You have to also kind of be much freer in your writing. Journalistic writing is in some ways very formulaic. There's a certain way you structure a story. There's certain elements that belong in that article. There's certain ways you set up sentences and quotes. And you also have to be very impartial. You're laying out facts. When you're writing fiction, you're really telling a story. You have to get deep into someone's emotional and intellectual being. So that requires a different kind of approach and a different kind of writing. You've got to.
It's more intimate in that way.
It's much more intimate. I think you have to be very honest about your own feelings, and you have to really be able to observe and see people and see who they are and tell a good story.
So does this come natural to you as a writer, journalistic writer for all these years, or did you have to change modes and
Some people say that journalistic writing kills your fiction writing abilities, but I'm not sure that's true. I mean, there are a lot of good things you learn from journalistic writing, but you have to relearn how to write. Yeah, so a lot of reporters make the jump to book writing, but they often write nonfiction, and some write fiction.
It's easier.
It's easier to write nonfiction, but a lot of them write fiction too. A lot of people are looking for life after journalism, and book writing isn't natural.
So you are finding your life after journalism, huh?
I'm trying to, yes.
Okay, well, I've been talking with award-winning journalist Kathy Chen. We'll be talking more about life after journalism, especially since her family is here. Kin Moy, her husband, is here as the director of the American Institute in Taiwan. We'll be talking more about their life here in Taiwan as a diplomat family and life after journalism. Thanks for tuning in to Taiwan Today.